SITREP World Briefing for June 15, 2026. Russia launched a major air attack on Kyiv early Monday, killing several people and damaging a historic religious site in the Ukrainian capital as fire spread through part of the complex. The strike was described as one of the heaviest attacks on Kyiv in recent weeks, and it came as Russian bombardments intensified across Ukraine, extending beyond the capital to other parts of the country. Available reports agreed that the attack on Kyiv set a historic Orthodox site on fire, although they differed on whether to describe the affected structure primarily as a cathedral or as part of a monastery complex. France 24 reported that 4 people were killed in the capital, while another France 24 account said at least 5 people were killed and 20 wounded in attacks across Ukraine, and the BBC later put the nationwide death toll at 9. The strike highlighted the continuing vulnerability of Kyiv to long-range Russian attacks more than 2 years after Moscow's full-scale invasion transformed the war into a campaign of attrition, air defense pressure, and repeated attacks on infrastructure, neighborhoods, and nationally significant sites. The United States and Iran agreed to a memorandum of understanding calling for an immediate end to military operations, marking a diplomatic turn after a period of direct confrontation. The agreement, announced through Pakistani mediation and confirmed by both sides, was presented as a framework to stop fighting on all fronts, giving Washington and Tehran a formal basis for moving from battlefield escalation to negotiations over the practical terms of de-escalation. A central part of the understanding is the path toward reopening the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important shipping choke points, after wartime disruption and a U.S. blockade on Iran affected energy trade and maritime traffic. The deal's outline includes halting the blockade and restoring passage through Hormuz, but major implementation questions remain, including how quickly commercial shipping can normalize and what happens next with Iran's nuclear program. The agreement became a focal point for allied diplomacy as G7 leaders opened their summit in Evian-les-Bains, France, with the U.S.-Iran arrangement on the agenda. French President Emmanuel Macron said a French-UK mission was ready to help support the reopening of Hormuz, indicating that European governments are preparing for the security and commercial consequences of any ceasefire. President Emmanuel Macron opened the G7 summit in eastern France on Monday with a diplomatic goal of narrowing differences with U.S. President Donald Trump on Iran, Ukraine, trade, and regulation of big technology companies. Authorities confronted anti-G7 protesters near the venue with police action against demonstrators. The opening of the summit combined high-level talks among allied leaders with unrest outside the meeting area. Macron's role at the summit is important because France, as host, is trying to keep the G7 focused on coordinated positions, even as Washington and its partners disagree on several core files. RFI said the French president was leading an effort to bridge transatlantic divides. Leaders enter negotiations divided over Iran, Ukraine, commerce, and digital regulation. The G7 remains one of the principal forums where the United States, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Canada, and the United Kingdom try to align policy before disagreements spill into wider institutions and markets. In eastern France, Macron is using that stage to test whether personal diplomacy with Trump can produce common language on contested issues. Meanwhile, the protests near the summit venue serve as a reminder that large international gatherings attract organized opposition to globalization, security policy, and elite decision-making. Clashes broke out in Geneva, Switzerland, on June 14 as about 20,000 demonstrators marched ahead of the Group of 7 summit in nearby Evian-les-Bains, France. Protesters opposing the G7 and broader global economic policies moved through the city before violence erupted near Geneva's United Nations district, where some participants threw stones and firecrackers at police, and officers responded with tear gas and water cannons. The protest took place before leaders gathered in Evian-les-Bains, a French resort town just across the border from Switzerland, giving Geneva unusual importance as both a diplomatic hub and a staging ground for transnational activism. Geneva hosts major international institutions, including UN offices, and demonstrations there often carry symbolic weight because protesters can target both national governments and global governance bodies in a single setting. The episode also revived a familiar security challenge for Swiss and French authorities whenever high-level summits are held near dense, urban areas and international borders. By erupting before the G7 meeting formally convened, the violence added pressure on police and summit planners to contain further disruption around Evian-les-Bains and surrounding cities, while preserving access routes and diplomatic security. Sources and the full written briefing are available at sitrepbrief.com.